Who really believes that political violence is a new thing? Do you really believe it's a new thing? That means you weren't paying attention in history. By the way, I enjoy history. It might seem boring, but if you get the right books, it's very enlightening. Violence in America erupted anytime the wind blew in a different direction. No rhyme or reason. The idea that there's political violence or violence in America like this is just unheard of. It was just not appropriate. And everybody must condemn it. Everybody. That is what Biden said in a statement after the July 13th shooting. And that July 13th shooting happened in 2024. Last year. I'll be back. Hey everyone, welcome back. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for returning. Thank you. And let's get into these articles that I found on political violence. Every time, after the Charlie Kirk shooting, it was mind-boggling and a head-scratcher when I heard people talking about political violence, right? And to me, it seemed as though they were framing it to sound like this is a new thing. I know they kept saying, we need to stop political violence. We need to stop political violence. I'm like, political violence has always been a thing. They're saying the Revolutionary War was political violence. Let's not forget the most infamous act of political violence when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. When the other president, Kennedy, they attempted to assassinate Ronald Reagan, and a plethora of other people. It's kind of slipping my mind right now. So many, but it's like, really, political violence has always been a thing. So let's stop it. How about let everybody be free to think the way they want to think and feel the way they want to feel about whatever party you guys still base your life on. You have a right to align with that party if you want to. You have a right to believe their ideology, no matter how tainted and warped it is. You have a right. But what you don't have a right to do is to force your belief and opinions on others. That's what you don't have a right to do. And that is where political violence come in. People actually get mad and have a temper tantrum and go out and try to harm other people because of how they feel and what they think and what they believe. I think that is sick. And it's another form of witchcraft, but that's a whole different story in itself. But let's get on with these articles. Law enforcement identified Thomas Matthew Crooks, a 20-year-old Pennsylvania man, as the Butler, Pennsylvania rally shooting suspect. Corey Comparatore, a former volunteer fire chief from the area, was unalived and two others were critically injured. In 2005, a man threw a grenade at President George Bush when he was attending a rally in Georgia with Georgian President Saakashvili. In 1981, President Ronald Reagan was injured in an assassination attempt, suffering an injured arm, broken rib, punctured lung, and serious internal bleeding. Political violence directed at U.S. presidents began with Abraham Lincoln in 1865, followed by James Garfield in 1881, William McKinley in 1901, and John F. Kennedy in 1963. each of whom died after being shot. President Gerald Ford escaped uninjured from two 1975 attempts. Governor George Wallace survived a shooting in 1972 while running for president. In 1881, Reagan was injured. Robert F. Kennedy was unalive, murdered in June 1968 while campaigning for the presidency. All were shootings or attempted shootings. Two historians documented other examples of candidates or political leaders who faced assassination attempts. The attack on Trump appears to fit a lone shooter pattern of politically motivated violence, which also has been demonstrated against members of Congress in June 2017 when Rep. Steve Scalise was shot and wounded, Ali said of the Louisiana Republican. Some experts, including Kleinfeld, also pointed to several examples of political violence directed at groups, particularly communities of color and prominent political and social justice leaders. America has a long history of episodic political violence, from violence against Catholics and immigrants by the Know Nothing Party in the early 1800s to the blood-soaked Kansas, Missouri borderlands and the abolitionist and slave fights of the 1850s, the Civil War, and then the fight against civil rights in 1950s to 1960s, Kleinfeld said. She added that from 1963 to 1968 alone, assassins killed Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., and both John F. and Robert Kennedy. Threats against members of Congress and federal judges have also increased, Kleinfeld said, and local and state officials have also faced threats. When Senator Amy Klobuchar in 2022 said threats of political violence had increased against election officials, judges, and lawmakers, we rated her claim mostly true. We found that U.S. Capitol Police data show that threats against the members of Congress rose from 902 in 2016 to 9,625 in 2021. A roughly tenfold increase before declining modestly in 2022. Data released by the Capitol Police in January 2024 showed 7,501 cases in 2022 and 8,008 cases in 2023. What do you think these threats have in common? I'm sure a lot of you guys know what I'm referencing. Let's go on. Here are some high-profile political violence incidents over the past 15 years. U.S. Rep. Gabby Gifford. On January 8, 2011, Gifford was shot in the head while meeting with constituents at a Congress on Your Corner event in a supermarket parking lot in Arizona. Gifford was the target of an assassination attempt and was seriously wounded. According to news reports, Gerald Lee Longner became fixated on Gifford several years before the shooting. Longner first met Gifford in 2007 at a community event where he asked her a question and was unsatisfied with her answer. CNN reported Longner was sentenced in 2012 to life in prison with no eligibility for parole for the shooting that killed 6 people and wounded 13 others, including Gifford. U.S. Rep. Steve Scalise. On June 14, 2017, Scalise was then the House Majority Whip, and 4 others were wounded when James Hawkinson shot at them during their baseball practice in Alexandria, Virginia. Hawkinson, who was angry with Trump and posted rants about Republicans online, was killed by police. Authorities reported he was a supporter of Bernie Sanders. Paul Pelosi. On October 28, 2022, Pelosi, the husband of then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, was attacked in the couple's San Francisco home by an intruder, David DePapi, who intended to kidnap Nancy Pelosi, struck Paul Pelosi in the head with a hammer. He was sentenced in May to 30 years in prison following his conviction on assault and attempted kidnapping charges. U.S. District Judge Esther Salada's son Daniel Andrew, on July 19, 2020, Andrew was fatally shot by a lawyer posing as a delivery driver at the judge's New Jersey home, and her husband Mark was injured. Roy Den Hollander, the shooter, shot himself and died. News reports said Hollander described himself as an anti-feminist lawyer and targeted the judge. Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer in October 2020, law enforcement announced that multiple people were arrested and charged with conspiring to kidnap Whitmer. Multiple people were convicted in state and federal court. U.S. Capitol. More than 1,400 defendants have been charged in the January 6, 2021 attack on the U.S. Capitol as lawmakers inside sought to certify the 2020 election results. Some of the defendants carry weapons. Some rioters threatened the then Vice President, chanting, "Hang Mike Pence." A terrific new account of America's social and political turmoil during the 1910s and 20s provide some much needed perspective on the problems afflicting the country today. They wrote this article in 2022. We have become so used to hearing that Americans are more politically polarized now than at any time since the Civil War in 1861 to 65 that such a statement is now accepted as a truism. It might even be correct, but it hardly means that we're doomed to repeat the Civil War or that we're facing our most serious internal crisis since then. Consider the late 1910s and early 1920s. A time when the United States was roiled by violent social unrest, apocalyptic paranoia, government censorship, and turbocharged xenophobia. Stacies like mass surveillance and repression and racist lynching and pogroms. One can only imagine how stressful and exhausting that era would have been with a 24-hour news cycle and social media hyping the latest real and imagined outrage. Yeah, they love hyping folks up, don't they? But how many are about that life? The ones that be hyping you guys up on social media? How many are about that life? How many will pull up their sleeves? Yeah, okay. Like I said, they're going to sit in their luxury homes, one of their luxury homes, and watch you lose everything you have. Let's go on. And yet, this convulsive era is lost to time and memory as though it never happened. That's why I said that's how they talk about it. This political violence has to stop. It has always been political violence in this country. We remember the American Revolution, the Civil War, the Great Depression, and the political and cultural upheavals of the late 60s and early 70s. The last of these still exists within loving memory, and the earlier emergencies were more monumental and consequential. But the forgotten period, the one that is seldom invoked or even named, was nonetheless more dangerous and unhinged than the one we're living through now. Historian Adam Hochschild brings this period to life in his terrific book, our new book, American Midnight, The Great War of Violent Peace and Democracy's Forgotten Crisis, a story of how a war supposedly fought to make the world safe for democracy became the excuse for a war against democracy at home. Listen to this, and this is going to remind you of what's going on today. They don't do anything different. All they do is regurgitate things that happened in the past, not so far past and far past, and do it again. Listen to this. This is what they're doing, what these Republicans are doing. This sounds like what they did back then. Listen to this. Like all the best history books, American Midnight reads like a novel. I'm gonna have to get this book. Like all the best history books, American Midnight reads like a novel with three-dimensional characters from President Woodrow Wilson. He was an evil, diabolical racist, for real. I said that, not the book. And Attorney General A. Mitchell Palmer to socialist presidential candidate Eugene Debs and Russian-born anarchist Emma Goldman. Adam begins with President Wilson, a Democratic and progressive. It's important to note here that both parties back then had progressive and conservative wings, and that both have since undergone ideological alignment, so the labels don't mean the same things now that they did then. Nevertheless, Woodrow remains one of the most monstrous presidents in our country's history. Didn't I tell you that? He destroyed middle-class black Americans. I did a video on it about a year ago. University students today insist that he was a racist, which he certainly was. But his faults hardly end there. During his tenure, the United States assumed more characteristics of authoritarianism than at any time before or since. Nope. I think Trump took a chapter out of this racist ass bastard's book. I do. Listen to what he did, or listen to what his administration let take place. Wilson's presidential campaign pledged to keep the country out of the meat grinding war across the Atlantic, and he kept that promise for nearly 3 years until Congress declared war on Germany in April 1917. But American Midnight isn't about the First World War. It's about what happened at home during and after. The declaration of war in the House of Representatives passed by 373 votes to 50. And while most Americans approved of the decision, there were noisy pockets of dissent, as there are whenever democracies fight wars. Wilson feared that even the mildest bleats of complaint will undermine the morale necessary to sustaining the war effort. The upshot was the Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918, which had almost nothing to do with actual espionage. Instead, it declared any kind of anti-war activity to be criminal and defined opposition in ways that few modern critics or pacifists and insulationists would even recognize now. It's not a war happening here, or I guess you can count if you're counting what's happening in Israel. I'm talking about what they have recently done with Charlie Kirk's murder. You see how they started clamping down on censorship and thinking of all kind of ways to silence people? Where you think that's leading to? Okay, let me continue. Anyone who shall willfully make or convey false reports or false statements with intent to interfere with the operation of military and naval forces of the United States was subject to arrest. So they haven't been trying to arrest people, but they have been trying to destroy people's financial livelihood by getting them fired. Let's continue. It would be a mistake to assume that Wilson administration was only going after the purveyors of what we now call fake news, or to get hung up on the words with intent to interfere. Ordinary people were rounded up and prosecuted who had no intentions of interfering with anyone or anything, and those convicted faced up to 20 years in prison, twice as long as the sentence Vladimir Putin metes out to his Russian subjects for similar offenses today. A Texas man was jailed for saying, "I wish Wilson was in hell." Andreas Laczekow's novel Men in War was banned for describing the war as a wholesome cripple and corpse factory. Police officers arrested playwright Eugene O'Neill at gunpoint on Cape Cod because somebody saw sunlight reflecting off his typewriter and thought he was sending signals to German ships. Filmmaker Robert Goldstein was arrested for co-writing and producing a silent film called The Spirit of 76 about the American Revolution. Regardless of what happened in 1776, the presiding judge said, "We are engaged in a war in which Great Britain is an ally of the United States, and this was not the time for sowing dissension among our people or creating animosity between us and our allies." Goldstein was handed 10 years in prison. It became a federal offense to send seditious newspapers and magazines through the mail, which was the only way anyone could subscribe to them in the days before the internet. Masses magazines, for instance, was deemed unmailable after it published a political cartoon that showed the Liberty Bell crumbling. A pamphlet titled Why Freedom Matters was banned not for criticizing the war, but for criticizing censorship. At least the author of the pamphlet knew why. Sometimes Rothschild writes, as if anticipating the protagonist of Kafka's The Trial, a journalist could not even learn what he or she was accused of. Newspapers and magazines in foreign languages were likewise banned, whether they criticized the government or not. Who knew what kind of diabolical speech might appear in a paper that censors couldn't read? This censorship was accompanied by a repressive clampdown that's hard to even imagine today. I can imagine it. President Wilson's special emissary, a former senator named Elihu Root, said there are men walking about the streets of this city tonight who ought to be taken out at sunrise tomorrow and shot for treason. How many of these Republicans have been insinuating or directly saying that people should lose their lives and freedom for criticizing a YouTuber podcaster? Okay, let's go on. There are some newspapers published in the city every day, the editors of which deserve conviction and execution. Vice President Thomas R. Marshall said he wanted Congress to take away the citizenship of every disloyal American. Now, you tell me they didn't take a chapter out of that fool's book, Woodrow Wilson. Let's continue. Every American who is not heartily in support of this government in its crisis, I will annul the citizenship of every such individual and confiscate his property. I saw one of those Republicans said that Americans passports should be revoked or taken from them if they criticize Charlie Kirk. You see where I'm getting at? You see that? Don't this. You cannot tell me this is not what this man wrote in his book, his history novel is not, and what took place with Woodrow Wilson's administration is not similar to what these people are doing today. But that was what they were doing, this because they were literally in war. These people are trying to take people's livelihoods and freedom because they are saying what this man said in his podcast and his platform, simply repeating what they said, what he said, and they're being targeted. Let's go on. The Department of Justice authorized former advertising executive Albert Briggs to deputize civilian vigilantes into the American Protective League, which had 1,200 chapters and roughly 250,000 members. They tapped phones and placed bugs in the homes of those they surveilled. They raided houses and seized documents. They rode trains and listened for disloyal speech, like what they're going to do with the new TikTok that a lot of people said they are not going to download the American TikTok. Supposedly the new app for TikTok is only going to be for America. No other country can join it. And so people are thinking that they're going to be surveyed. Everything they say is going to be spied on and surveyed. And they say they are leaving TikTok. So congratulations, America. You single-handedly are destroying the most popular app. Oh, let's go on. TikTok has its ways. It's very biased, and I have experienced some biasness going on. So me personally, I really don't care. I don't. Let's go on. The Seattle branch alone investigated more than 10,000 people and arrested more than 1,499 of whom were charged with seditious utterances. One official described a Midwestern chapter of the APL as the KKK of the prairies. He meant it as a compliment. The Bureau of Investigation, which later became the FBI, likewise sent spies into legal organizations. This country is a trip. But America's supposed to be the land of the free, right? Okay. Yep, they're supposed to be the land of the free. How you like them apples? Let's continue. In Chicago, 10,000 APL agents went on a full-born repression spree at movie theaters, vaudeville shows, and a Cubs doubleheader. Hootchill writes, the raiders made everyone fill out of designated exits where each draft-age man had to show his card. Badge-wearing vigilance checked every arriving train or steamboat and combed parks, bars, restaurants, elevated train stations, and nightclubs. They stopped cars to question drivers and passengers and even appeared at the beaches and bathing suits wading into Lake Michigan to interrogate suspects. I can imagine what they did to black folks. Whatever they do to white folks, it's always worse with blacks. Even after the war ended, state repression and censorship continued unabated. A few senators introduced a bill to put a stop to it, but got nowhere. Its failure remarked progressive Republican Robert Lafayette ought to make the farmers. Its failures, remarked progressive Republican Robert Lafayette, ought to make the formers of the Constitution open their eyes in their coffins. Yeah, they always say things like that, but they don't really do too much to stop it. Those who claim they're against what's happening in the past and now, what are they really doing to stop it? You know, all these Democrats and what's so crazy is the Republicans are supposed to be for free speech. Jesus Christ. I wish you guys stop letting these politicians pimp you guys, because it's looking very it's humiliating that you guys are allowing these. Not humiliating on my part, but when the world see you guys, this is supposed to be the country, the powerful country of America, and you citizens which make this country are allowing these politicians to pimp you out and tell you to shut up, and you shut up and go bury your head in a corner like a little child. Oh my God, let's go on. History everywhere alternates between periods of calm, punctuated by periods of turmoil. No country can remain at a furious boil forever, but the quiet interludes have expiration dates of their own. In the late 1910s and early 1920s were tumultuous times. Inflation soared more than 40% between 1917 and 1920 alone. What's going on with inflation? What's going on with inflation? I was about to say inflammation. What's going on with inflation now? Let's continue. Waves of immigrants were arriving from Europe, bringing unfamiliar languages and customs. You know what I was going to say? I forgot to say. Has anyone, when I said, you don't notice people saying, oh my God, America's not racist. You don't hear them saying that now after the mass deportations, right? Have you noticed, how they parade Asian deportees and Africans and Hispanics? Do you see them parading around illegal Europeans? You notice you don't see that, right? If they are arresting him, they doing it very quietly out of camera. Let's go on. The social order among native-born Americans was also at a flux as women prepared to win the right to vote for the first time. With war raging against Germany, anyone speaking German on American streets risked a beating. While this sort of thing is common everywhere in the world during wartime, formation against immigrants in general, German or otherwise, reached a fever pitch, and some American states banned the public use of all foreign language. You hear that? Now you see what Native Black Americans mean when we talk to you groups. Yeah, you see. Okay, they temporarily disenfranchised you. They continue to disenfranchise Black folks, Native Black Americans, FBAs, for centuries. Let's go on. Oh God, everybody want to be oppressed now. Keep telling me how many other groups were enslaved. I keep asking the same question. Were you enslaved on American soil? If you wasn't, excuse yourself out of the conversation. Am I speaking English or not? Let's go on. Most immigrants at the time were arriving from Italy, Eastern Europe, and Russian Empire. They were predominantly Catholic, Jewish, and Eastern Orthodox. Today, most of us would lump them together as white, but back then the recent arrivals were reviled the way refugees and asylum seekers from Latin America are despised in certain circles today. Representative Albert Johnson of Washington State decried what he called WAPs, bohunks, coolies, the Oriental off-scourging in the chambers of Congress. Wilson himself lamented that the countries of the South of Europe were disburdening themselves of the more sordid and hapless elements of their population. Didn't Trump say that about Hispanics? Didn't he say those Spanish countries were unburdening their criminals over here? They said that about you, white folks. They said those European countries were sending their criminals over here. Y'all forgot about that, huh? Grandparents didn't teach you that? They didn't tell you what Americans said about you? Oh, okay. Strife. Meanwhile, social strife and political violence became nearly as ubiquitous as the so-called Spanish flu during the 1918 pandemic, which killed between 50 and 100 million people worldwide without Wilson bothering even to mention it. Socialists, anarchists, and right-wing vigilantes beat each other in the streets with clubs, and Boston war opponents and union members clashed with right-wingers in a melee involving 20,000 people. The Trump era Thunderdome showdowns in downtown Portland between left-wing and right-wing hoodlums only numbered a couple of hundred. Anarchists murdered dozens in bomb blasts at offices and private homes, often accompanied by leaflets saying, "You jailed us, you clubbed us, you deported us, you murdered us." The worst violence was racial. The KKK revived itself from near extinction in 1915 and burst from its former confines in the South into every state in the Union. The hooded horsemen were the heroes of D.W. Griffin's groundbreaking but ambiguously racist 1915 propaganda epic, The Birth of a Nation. President Wilson screened the film in his White House. And it's like writing history with lightning. This is what Wilson said about that deplorable movie. My only regret is that it is all so terribly true. Oh God. In Chicago, white gangs drove through black neighborhoods firing at random. And they got the nerves to talk about black violence and street gangs. They yank people out of restaurants and shops and beat them in the streets. What you said about black violence again? Oh, okay. Black citizens fled north from violently segregationist South for perfectly obvious reasons, but the Democratic Party deploying an earlier iteration of the Great Replacement Theory accused Republicans of importing black people to dilute the urban Democratic vote. Racist and paranoid talk led inexorably to violent racist action. In East St. Louis, Illinois, an enraged white mob torched more than a dozen blocks of black neighborhoods where recent Southern arrivals had chosen to settle, and they threatened to shoot anyone who tried to escape. What I tell you, whatever they do to white folks, that's not good. They do to black people, and it's worse. They shot anyone who tried to escape. They destroyed 245 buildings, killed up to 150 people, and even threw a child into the fire. Oscar Leonard at the Jewish Educational and Charitable Association of St. Louis rightly called it a pogrom. Wilson had no more to say about this than he did about the pandemic. Why would he? The man was a ferocious racist, not only by the standards of our era, but by his own. As a young man, he wrote in his diary, "Universal suffrage is at the foundation of every evil in this country." Most Americans may have been relatively indifferent to racial violence, but labor violence also loomed large. During general strikes, workers attacked strikebreakers with bricks and knives. Ominous talk of revolution and sabotage became even more frightening after the 1917 revolution in Russia and the Civil War that followed it. The industrial workers of the world, colloquially known as the Wobbles, were everybody's favorite boogeyman. Their newspapers occasionally advocated industrial sabotage, but they never explicitly stated what they meant. And no one in the 1WW was ever actually convicted of the crime. One of the first general strikes took place in Seattle, and the entire city fell silent as if bracing for war. Many fled to hotels in Portland, 175 miles to the south. The mayor accused labor of hoping to duplicate the anarchy of Russia and swore in an additional 3,000 police officers. Today, Seattle only has a total of 940 police officers, even though the city is more than twice the size it was then. It goes on, the article goes on to say more, but I'm going to stop it there because I didn't want to make a long video. But yeah, folks, this article reminds me of what's going on today. What happened back then with Woodrow Wilson's administration reminds me of what's going on today. But I guarantee you they won't have the same outcome. Because I see bullies like to get you when you're at the most vulnerable. They don't want to fight head up. They want to get you where you're the most vulnerable. So, folks, I'm going to end it right there. I was just giving you a little brief history on political violence in this country, and social violence, and racial violence, and all kind of violence these hateful racists can think of. It's time for y'all to stop. You know what I enjoy that's happening now is the covers are finally being ripped off. The curtains are finally being ripped down, showing who are the authors of violence in this country. You guys have been projecting and hiding behind black folks for centuries, and now you're being exposed before the world. And this is just the beginning. Okay, folks, I'm about to shut down the shop. And I will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for subscribing. Thank you for commenting, liking, and sharing. Thank you for all your support. We really appreciate it. And be safe, folks. Deuces.